Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. The Democrats scored big with legislation that provides the biggest investment in climate-friendly energy ever. But will it get them any love at the ballot box? Let's get to the bottom line. After a year of nasty internal bickering, progressive and conservative Democrats came together this week to pass a huge initiative and score a win for President Joe Manchin. Oops, I meant President Joe Biden. The bill is called the Inflation Reduction Act, and it invests in clean energy programs, allows the government to negotiate lower drug prices, and it raises some corporate taxes. It dedicates $300 billion to reduce the deficit, which the Democrats argue will also reduce inflation. At least that's the theory. It took every single Democrat in the Senate to vote for it, and they needed Vice President Kamala Harris's vote to push it over the edge 51-50. Every single Republican senator voted against it. Republicans say climate change is the last thing on the mind of the American people, and they're confident that they can win back control of Congress this November. Are they right? And can the Democrats' achievements move the political needle for Joe Biden, whose popularity levels are still historically low? Today, we're talking with Congressman Ro Khanna, a Democrat who represents Silicon Valley in California and is one of the leading progressive voices in his party. Congressman Khanna, it's great to be with you. And look, I was sort of joking when I mentioned President Joe Manchin. And, you know, this is President Joe Biden's victory. It has happened under his watch. But there were a lot of parents to this mega bill that makes the biggest investment in clean technology for energy that we've ever done before. Senator Schumer was a parent of this bill. Leader Speaker Pelosi was as well and signed off on it. A lot of people came together to help this. But you played a very important role, I know from my own reporting, and that was you gave Joe Manchin the benefit of the doubt when no one else would. Can you tell us, from your perspective, what it took to get this bill done, and what were the key priorities you had?
Well, Steve, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your role in encouraging people to keep dialogue open with Senator Manchin. You know, I think it's funny how you started out, because when Joe Manchin called me, he said, I'm one of his first calls after the deal. He said, hey, this is Joe. And I said, President Biden? And he said, no, it's Senator Manchin. And, you know, it was just that moment of how both President Biden and Senator Manchin were the key, and Senator Schumer, to this extraordinary deal. But look, I have thought that Senator Manchin has been consistent, actually, from the beginning. And he has said he's for the innovation spending, but he wants some of the permitting reform, and he wants to make sure that they're not the sticks that will be too hard on the economy in his state. And so when the talks broke down in January, I reached out to him. He actually called me on New Year's Day, and we've been talking almost every other week, every month. And I would just say, look, if you come up with a big climate number, I will assure you that the progressives and a lot of the environmental groups will support it.
But I want to just stop you there for a minute, Ro. Yeah. I want to stop you there. So things looked very dead, and yet you had a positive call with him. And I just wanted to, strike this importance, because you've been criticized for keeping the door open for Joe Manchin. What gave you hope?
Well, I've had a relationship with him since 2017, because we did a project in Beckley, West Virginia, to create some tech jobs at West Virginia Tech. And my experience from then was that he really likes the innovation. He gets the technology part. And I was confident that he would support massive innovation here. And I also was confident that he'd support us doing that and not having to go to China. And if I didn't have that belief, I would have said, OK, this is not worth negotiating. But the deal we actually ended up getting to was, frankly, the contours he outlined in January. He said, look, Ro, I can be for the investment, a big number on climate. And I said, Senator Manchin, that's the one thing we need, or our progressives will not come on board if it's just window dressing. It has to be substantial. Then he said, I need some deficit reduction. I've got no problem with the higher taxes. In fact, he would have probably had the higher taxes on wealthy individuals as well if we could have gotten Sinema on for that. And I want to make sure Medicare negotiates. So, and what I did is every couple of weeks would check in. I even participated when he did the bipartisan talks. I was the only House member. And I did lose a bunch of, people on my side, especially the progressive side. They were attacking me. One video had the downfall of Ro Khanna. How is it that, you're having these conversations instead of going on TV and, insulting Senator Manchin? But my view was that we needed his support. and that he would get there. And in my interactions with him, he was negotiating in good faith. Doesn't mean I agreed with everything he was saying, but you could see that he was consistent in where he was coming from.
Well, you were clearly the realist progressive in the story. I want to show you a tweet from one of your supporters. It's Varshini Prakash, who's co-founder of the Sunrise Movement. And she writes, "Finally, a climate bill has passed the Senate. This isn't the bill my generation deserves, but it is the one we can get. It must pass to give us a fighting chance at a livable world." I find it fascinating because this is also a realist take on the situation and where we can have. It also lays out that we need to do much more. But at the end of the day, I guess with your wing of the Democratic caucus, part of this bill is about energy security, about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and creating a global energy squeeze, basically reforming permitting so that both mines and other fossil fuel platforms will move more expeditiously and quickly. Can your caucus that is so focused on climate and trying to reduce the footprint of fossil fuels live with that deal?
Yes, and Varshini and Sunrise have been hugely helpful. And Evan Berger, he was one of the first people I texted after I got off the phone with Senator Manchin when he told me about the deal. And I always had a sense that Sunrise, which deserves a lot of credit, by the way, for getting to the deal. And the reason I say that is if they weren't out there marching, if they weren't there organizing, if they hadn't done what they did with Senator Markey and the Green New Deal, climate wouldn't have been as front and center. It wouldn't have been, it could have been the one thing that was negotiated away, like childcare or other portions of the Build Back Better. The reason it was never non-negotiable is because of their activism and their insistence that we had to go big. So I give them credit, and then I give them double credit for being pragmatic. And they put out a tweet, if you remember, that night itself when Manchin came out for the deal saying, let's get behind this. It's not perfect. It has flaws, but we're behind this. Probably no single organization having that tweet out there made a bigger difference than what they did. Remember, they're the ones who sat in Pelosi's office when Representative Ocasio-Cortez visited them in the sit-in when she first got elected. They were the ones behind Markey. They're hugely behind Bernie Sanders. So they have shown real leadership here.
There are other parts of the bill, and again, to go back in history, and nobody wants to talk about where we've been. They only want to talk about where we're coming next. But this started out as a $3.5 billion or $1 trillion package. And actually, if you go with Bernie Sanders, it was a $6 trillion package. So you got $3.5 trillion. And in that package then was called Build Back Better that was originally looked at. These, a lot of these climate provisions were in it, but also, subsidized child care, other dimensions in health care support and subsidy, paid medical leave, free community college, and other sort of social infrastructure elements. I'm just interested, those are now gone, and this bill is now $739 billion overall, I think that's where it came out. And, roughly, $300 billion has gone to deficit reduction. So it's a much smaller bill. But when it comes to these other social infrastructure elements, can the Democratic Party still look at its constituents in a straight face and say we still delivered, other than we failed?
Yes, because you have to look at the cumulative term of what we have delivered. The American Rescue Plan had saved so many people from losing their house, being evicted from their apartment. The child tax credit saved many people in the pandemic from poverty. You have the infrastructure bill, which is going to start to rebuild a lot of the lead, remove the lead from waterways. It's going to start rebuilding a lot of our airports, our bridges in communities across the country, including communities of color, rural America, disadvantaged communities. You have the CHIPS Act, which is going to bring new manufacturing and new jobs, blue-collar jobs, into places like Columbus, Ohio. And then you have this bill, which is going to bring solar, wind, help with steel because of the Buy American provisions, and that's going to create blue-collar employment. Now, do we need to do a $15 wage? Do we need universal child care? Do we need to make sure that we have dental, vision, and hearing as part of Medicare? Do we need to expand Medicare so people aren't being stuck with medical debt? Absolutely. And this is why young people think the American dream is slipping away. And we need to continue to work on that. But you can't dismiss all of the progress that we have made in 2 years. You have to say, okay, we've gotten this far. Let's keep going.
You know, I want to show you right now something somewhat stark. 538, as you know, comes up and, amalgamates a lot of different polls. So this is not their poll, but this is an amalgamation of all the leading polls in the country right now. And President Biden's popularity and approval is about 39.3%. Those who disapprove are 55.6%. And I want to read you a statement that Joe Biden just issued on the Inflation Reduction Act. In it, he says, today, Senate Democrats sided with American families over special interests, voting to lower the cost of prescription drugs, health insurance, and everyday energy costs, and reduce the deficit while making the wealthiest corporations finally pay their fair share. I guess my question to you now is, and I say this looking at you, and I'm not going to ask you if you're going to run for president someday, but a lot of people look at you as someone who could run for president of the United States someday. Is the package we have, is the president's statement enough to come back and say, we're delivering on the social contract? Do you expect Joe Biden's numbers to increase? And what would someone who was running for president, be it Joe Biden or someone else, have to do to make a credible deal with those Americans who are still skeptical?
Well, first of all, I think he's one of the most successful presidents with those approval ratings. I don't think that those approval ratings are deserved. I mean, history is going to look very kindly of him, saying I hope and expect him to run. But here's my advice. I'm going to see him tomorrow at the chip signing. I don't know if I'll get a minute or two. Here's what I would tell him. I spent the last week on a factory tour. I was in Newcastle, Indiana. I was in Janesville, Wisconsin. I was in Dubuque, Iowa, and Burlington, Iowa. And here's what I heard. I heard from them, our jobs left, industry went offshore, no one cared about us. We lost our community. We had people committing suicide. We lost our marriages. Nothing has changed. And I would tell President Biden, get out there and talk about a new economic patriotism. Talk about not just the boilerplate language. Talk about why you get what these communities have happened. And that's why you signed this deal, so that we're finally going to have steel built here. We're going to put new battery plants up. We're going to put new windmill manufacturing up, solar manufacturing up, not in China, but here and in the communities that were most left out. I just think that the problem is that we're using, this Build Back Better thing. Who talks like that? Just call it Make It in America. We got to make more stuff in America. So my view is the president needs to get out on the road. He should go to some of these communities. He should talk about a new economic patriotism. And I think he will then break through. The problem isn't the policies. It's that the policy isn't connecting to a lot of the people in these communities.
So you've said something really important that I had not realized, Congressman, is you are actually visiting cities, and all the cities you just laid out are in key battleground states as you look at the next presidential election. You talked about economic patriotism, another framing that I find very interesting. How many others in the progressive wing of your party are coming to hang out in the coffee shops and, doing the talks at the schools and community colleges you are in these battleground states?
Well, they should. And, Steve, the first place I went was Indiana, to Newcastle, to Richmond, to Anderson. And someone, I won't say who, one of my colleagues said, Ro, why are you going there? Indiana is lost to us. And it's a red district. You realize Greg Pence represents there. I said, I'm going there precisely for that reason, because I don't want people to think this is just going to flip some district or flip some state. This is about understanding what happened to people. How in the world did we allow it so that our manufacturing and production just left this country? I mean, how is it in this country that we don't have masks, that we don't have a baby formula? How is it that even with all the amazing things we're doing in this climate bill, I read this morning that China has 70% of solar manufacturing, that they're building, while we're building these 12 semiconductor factories, China is building 30. And you go to those communities and there's anger and you hear their stories. And one person had a binder of all of the factories that have shut down in Anderson, Indiana over the last 40 years. And he went picture by picture. And he talked about, what it did to these workers. I just think for the Democratic Party, we got to build our message from the ground up. Go to these communities, hear people's grievance, hear their anger, and then afford the vision. And that's the only way we're going to stitch this country back together. And so I say we do a lot of good policy, but it's not translating fully into what people are feeling in their communities.
What is the Democrats' response to what the Republicans are talking about on immigration and crime being two of the biggest points of concern that voters have?
I'll talk about immigration and crime, but let me say on this inflation thing, instead of just sticking to our talking points, which are correct, that this is going to lower inflation because it's going to lower prescription drug costs and allow Medicare to negotiate and give people more health care. What if we tried this? You know, do you realize one of the reasons why prices are so high? It's because we didn't make anything in this country anymore. We had to rely on things being shipped, semiconductors being shipped from overseas, and that shipping is costing $14,000 instead of $2,000. How about we make more stuff in this country? How about we not be as reliant on shipping things from Asia? And you know what President Biden's doing? He's building more self-sufficiency. We're going to be making these things in America to lower the prices so we don't have this inflation. I think that breaks through to people. And so it's partly what we need to explain better why it's going to lower inflation. On immigration, I have said, I talk about, yes, we have to talk about the rights of immigrants. Every person born endowed by certain natural rights, they should have basic due process. But I said my parents, as immigrants from India, they talked a lot more about my responsibilities. Don't screw it up. You were born, you won the lottery, you were born in America. Go make something of yourself, work hard, learn about the country, get educated. I think the Democrats need to talk about what immigrant families are actually like. And they tend to be the most patriotic, and that they're going to help us rebuild America, reindustrialize America. Like Elon Musk, though I don't agree with everything, look at what the immigrants are doing in the new technology and new industrialization. And I think we shouldn't run away from it, but we should talk about immigrants' responsibility and patriotism instead of just emphasizing rights. The rights are also important. And on crime, I think it's got to be common sense. Of course we need police. Of course we want to keep communities safe. That is something, whether you're a white American, a black American, a Latino American, you can believe in. There's a common sense view here, which is if you're 20 years old and you shoplift, you shouldn't be locked up for 20 years. That's why we had reform on mass incarceration. But if you're 20 years old and you shoplift and you break into a building, it also should be that there's some consequences. It's not that we're a lawless society. And I think most Americans are there. They want police. They want consequences. They don't want to lock someone up for 20 years and destroy their life. And I just think we have to talk about crime in a way that's common sense.
You know, a lot of people have been seeing that the Republicans are going to win at least the House in the next election and come back. Do you agree with that? And do you think that the passage of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, with so many different parents out there, is going to reduce the numbers of the margin the Republicans might have?
Oh, look, we're an underdog. But, when I ran for Congress 3 times, I won my 3rd try. It was an underdog each time. And I invoked Rocky because I grew up in Philadelphia. So obviously the party is an underdog party because we have the presidency. The other party usually wins. It's no secret that inflation is still too high. Gas prices, though, coming down are too high. But you know what I think gives us a fighting chance is if we say we get that things aren't great, but we're looking and doing everything we possibly can, given the pandemic, to make sure that we're standing up for working families. We're rebuilding. We're going to give your kids a better future. We get it. Just give us a couple more seats and we'll keep fighting. And we don't deny that things aren't great. I mean, I think the happy talk doesn't help. It's sort of acknowledging where people are at and then giving them a sense that we're going to do everything possible, not just for the next 2 years, next 10 years. We need 10 years, if not more, to rebuild this country. And I think if we do that, especially also in light of Roe, where people are upset, even in Indiana, in red Indiana, I heard people just really upset at what the court has done in taking away these rights. And of course, in Indiana, the governor recently basically has almost made abortion completely illegal. Those 2 things give us a fighting chance. It's not going to be easy, but we're still in the fight.
Ro, I want to bring us back to this extraordinary deal and how unlikely it was to get to success. When you come back to that, it raises the question of what happens next time. I don't suspect we're going to have kumbaya politics within the Democratic wing again. But how do you make what happened, more likely next time than as unlikely as it seemed to most of the players out in the country? I don't know. I know that's a long-winded question, but I think it's an important one.
I'll tell you what I try. I think we ought to reach out to each other in different wings and in different parties and talk. And I try to come at it without questioning a person's motives. Doesn't mean I don't question their policies. Doesn't mean I don't argue with them about what's right with the country. But I don't go on. Sometimes I messed up, but I try not to go on and attack people personally. And that comes from two reasons. And people don't agree with me always. They think, Ro, you're being too nice. You're listening too much. But it comes from the way I was raised, because that's how my parents taught me to behave. You listen to people, you respect them, you try to find where they're coming from and common ground. And it comes from the example of my grandfather, who did it on a much bigger scale with Gandhi. That was Gandhian philosophy, that you try to find the best in someone else, and you try to then find common ground. And I guess we need a lot more of that, in my view, not just to win, but to try to find some sense of bringing this country together around common goals. I believe those common goals can be this new economic patriotism of building things and building them to tackle big problems like climate. I mean, the last thing I'll say is, for all my colleagues, doesn't it feel much better today with your service in Congress than it did sort of a year ago when we were all on TV screaming at each other? Now you feel you've accomplished something. And I think this should be a model for it in going forward.
Do you think there are other elements of the agenda that you and also Senator Bernie Sanders landed up, particularly in education and upskilling this country? I mean, there is a kind of credentialing problem and a lack of nimbleness in terms of human talent in the United States that needs to be fixed. Is that going to be part of your economic patriotism package?
Absolutely. Let me just, if I can go a little bit longer on this answer. In 1950, Stephen, this is based on the economist Thomas Piketty's research, America had 80% of high school graduates. Britain had 20%, France had 30%, even Germany had 40%. We were twice as many. We led the world in education. It's the single biggest thing, and we ought to do it in both cases. For those who want a four-year degree, make it possible economically, get them the possibility of getting that education. And for the 60% who are not going to get a four-year degree, let's make sure we have massive investment in getting them a credential that's actually going to lead to a job, and make sure you have the cooperation with industry so that they're getting that kind of credential. This can be a revitalization of our land grant system and an investment in that. But at the end of the day, when you look at Enrico Moretti's work, The Geography of Jobs, one of the best books written in the last 10 years, he says that the reason companies pick areas is because of their education level, not because of subsidies or state incentives. So it's the single biggest thing the country can do in terms of an investment in our future.
Well, we'll leave it there then. Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, thank you so much for your candid thoughts today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? What happened this week in U.S. politics is not big just because it will bring huge investment in next-generation clean energy. It's big because of how it happened. The Democratic Party finally came together in a way they almost never do. It was a grand compromise between the progressives and the conservatives. If either side had stuck to their red lines and ignored the other side, they would have ended up with worse than nothing. In that case, the world burns up. But instead, both sides modified what they wanted and ran with the best deal they could get. Can this be a template for America's polarized politics and society? Has anyone learned that compromise actually works? The sad thing I've got to admit is this bill was designed to help the world survive climate change. But still, there was not one Republican that signed on to it. Not one. If both parties don't take note of what the Democrats just did and begin looking at their colleagues across the aisle in the same way, the U.S. is going to end up paralyzed. Over and over and over. And that's the bottom line.